Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday the 29th of September and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and today I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh while our studios in Cowcaddens are upgraded. First we will have today's coronavirus update, and then I'll introduce this evening's guest, and then we will look at the stories behind today's news headlines together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,171,798 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,608,472 have been confirmed negative, and 563,326 have tested positive. There are 2,997 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. I'm afraid to say that there are 28 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,579. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,020 were in hospital last night, 71 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,186,743 people had received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,835,013 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that a total of 136,375 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that's an increase of 167 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we also have the National Records of Scotland update. As at the 26th of September, 10,991 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to the statistics published today. In the week between the 20th and the 26th of September, 165 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID on the death certificate, and that's 30 more than the previous week. 124 deaths occurred in hospitals, 21 were in care homes, and 20 were at home or in a non-institutional setting. Now, we are lucky this evening to be joined by a senior elected politician, Drew Hendry MP. Drew was a councillor and council leader with the Highland Council before being elected the MP for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey in 2015, beating Danny Alexander. He's now the SNP's international trade spokesperson. Drew's also remembered for asserting himself in the House of Commons during the very heated debates over the Internal Markets Bill. Drew, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you. Our first story this evening is that more than 2,000 jobs will be created by Social Security Scotland over the next 12 months, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has announced. Recruitment will start in October for staff to support the delivery of benefits due to be introduced next year, including the adult disability payment, the Scottish Government's replacement for the personal independence payment. The majority of the new roles will be based in Social Security Scotland's Dundee head office and in Glasgow to take calls from clients and to process applications for Scottish benefits. The remainder will be based across the country to provide face-to-face advice for people applying in the way that would suit them best, whether that is online, by phone, by post, or in person. The First Minister said, "Social security is a human right and a collective investment in the people of this country, now and for future generations." These roles come at a critical time in Scotland's recovery from the pandemic, and our investment will go beyond the money that we will pay in benefits. When we have introduced all our new benefits and moved clients from the DWP to Social Security Scotland, our new Social Security service will employ more than 3,500 people. This will provide secure, long-term employment in Dundee, Glasgow and across the country and deliver a positive economic impact of £280 million for our economy. So Drew, It's predicted that this agency will touch the lives of 1 in 3 Scots once this latest expansion is completed. So, how would you like to see the agency operating, either in terms of its approach to the Scots who are using it, or to those Scots who are hoping to be employed in it?
Well, I think it's off to a great start initially. It's now delivering, I believe, 11 benefits. 7 of those are new benefits that the Scottish Government have put in place to tackle poverty, to tackle child poverty, to help disabled people and others, people in care. So that's a great start. And the way they've set this out in the Scottish Government is to say that we want to set up a benefit system with dignity and respect at its heart. And that's really important. This announcement about the expansion of the social security setup in Scotland is great news, not only for the 3,500 jobs, and don't forget, all of them will be at least the real living wage, not the pretendy one they tout at Westminster, but a real living wage. But they'll be delivering to people on a face-to-face basis, which is something that the Tory Westminster government have really tried to strip out and to privatise that element of the interaction with people. So it's about giving them help and advice, and it's an investment in our country. It's an investment in our people, because if we're able to do these things, and wouldn't it be marvellous to do this with the full powers when you look at the mirror position with Westminster about to cut universal credit and put people into crisis, in their own words, into catastrophe over the coming months. Wouldn't it be great to be able to make this investment, because it saves money? If you can keep people out of poverty, then what you do is you keep them out of hospital, you keep them out of using other services, and it is actually a real investment, not only in the health and well-being of society, but in the happiness and in the actual infrastructure of society as well, removing stress and pressure on other services and saving money in that way. So this is terrific news. I look very, very much forward to the day when we can take a lot more on in Scotland. In fact, all of those with the powers that we've gained through independence. Because don't forget, at the moment, even though we're doing all this great work, it's about 15% of benefits that we have in Scotland. There's still 85% of them under Westminster control. And in my view, and in the view of many, in fact, pretty much every external commentator, they're making the wrong decisions for people in Scotland, as well as the other nations of the UK.
Thanks, Drew. I was thinking about the investment angle of this first story this evening, and if you'll indulge me for a second, if we use the Scottish Government's input-output model of the economy, it's estimated that we're talking here about 3,500 jobs, full-time equivalents, in the public sector in 2022, and that'll be a gross value added of about £280 million. Now, it struck me that this approach is in sharp contrast to what I think is the usual Westminster mantra, that the number of people employed in the public sector, be they police officers, nurses, or civil servants, has to be cut. £280 million into the economies of Dundee and Glasgow and elsewhere, because of course these are public sector jobs, so this money will be largely spent in those locations on shelter and food. And I think it's unlikely it'll be being saved offshore in tax-avoiding bank accounts. So does this investment into those economies, is this a good thing? And should we see, and if it is, should we be seeing more of it?
Well, it is a good thing. And firstly, let me just underline the point when you were saying about elsewhere. Primarily this is going to be in Dundee and Glasgow, but there is a real commitment there to look at jobs across Scotland. And we've seen the direction of travel on that, and I think that's a good thing for other areas, including in the Highlands and Islands and other parts of Scotland, where we can get that investment happening here. But it's not only that raw investment in jobs and that ability to get those well-paid jobs in the public sector into these areas that would boost the economy, as you've so rightly said, but all of the cuts that are made at Westminster to these things, I'll give you an example. It's costing £500 million for the Tory government to take £20 off universal people each week on universal credit. So they're looking to save £6 billion. So it's costing £500 million to start with. But that saving doesn't actually materialise, because it puts more pressure on other services. And Joseph Rowntree Foundation and others have done work on this to prove that the costs to other services will outweigh the spend or the saving that they're going to make on that. And in the meantime, making people's lives miserable. The different approach that's been taken by the Scottish Government over this is to, as I said earlier, to look at a system with dignity and respect at its heart and actually try to think about the well-being of the economy, indeed the well-being economy itself, which, if it's done properly, can actually lead to reduced costs in hospitals, reduced costs for education, reduced costs elsewhere. So it's a double whammy. You've got that investment in jobs, that investment in the local economies, but you've also got other people not sliding into poverty if it's done right. Unfortunately, because we don't have all the powers at the moment, and we are seeing that horrendous universal credit cut being taken at this time of year when we're about to launch into winter and facing higher energy and food costs as well. When we've got that coming, the Tory government are taking a completely different approach to this, and they're going to savage the people's lives. They're going to savage local economies by doing this. It really is a horrendous move, and in sharp contrast, as I say, to the foresight that's been shown by the Scottish government in taking this forward.
Thanks, Drew. And there was just one other brief thing that crossed my mind, really, in light of what you were saying. It strikes me that in respect of this 15% of benefits of the social security system, that these developments allow the Scottish Government and Social Security Scotland to, in a sense, to close the circle, to have a better idea about both demand and supply in terms of the social security system. Do you think that will spur even greater improvements in terms of the focusing and the delivery and the manner in which Social Security Scotland operates and the way in which the benefits that it will be operating are administered?
Well, I think it's off to a great start, and that's obviously the intention, is for this to be, kind of to think holistically, to think about, how to deliver these services in a much better way. And as I say, the announcement today about the planned expansion is a great move for people and for families in terms of what it can do. But again, the critical thing comes back to that 15% and 85% being held at Westminster, because everything that the Scottish Government does, and don't forget there's been a shed load of initiatives to try and mitigate the harm that's been coming out of the Tory government at Westminster. Things like mitigating the bedroom tax, bringing in the child payments, doubling that to come forward. All the other benefits that have been put in place, and I think, as I said earlier, I think there was about 11 now being run by then to try and alleviate child poverty, help people with disabilities. It's all being negated by the actions of the Tory government at Westminster, who are incredibly slow. I mean, people are waiting up to a year for employment support allowance payments, for personal independence payments through the DWP system. And of course, as I've mentioned, universal credit's never been enough. The fact that they put it up by £20 a week during the pandemic was an admission that it wasn't enough for people to live on. And now they're taking that away. So it really is moving forward, but being dragged back by that quite callous view from the DWP and those ministers in the Tory government at Westminster.
Thanks, Drew. Our next story is that 3 more UK energy suppliers have ceased to trade, the regulator Ofgem said today, leaving more than 230,000 customers facing the prospect of higher bills. The failure of Instroga, Igloo Energy and Symbio Energy has taken the tally of UK energy suppliers to go bust this month to 9, as wholesale energy prices have hit record highs. The price for households of the most widely used energy tariffs are capped, meaning some smaller firms, with less capital to hedge customer needs on the wholesale market, have struggled to keep pace with rising costs. Igloo, the largest of the latest suppliers to cease trading with 179,000 customers, said the price cap had made its business unsustainable. The price cap is reviewed twice a year and is set to rise by 12 to 13% from October the 1st, but wholesale prices have risen significantly since that announcement was made in August. Ofgem said any customer's outstanding credit would be protected, and a new supplier would be found. Customers' potential new energy costs will be covered by the energy cap, but if they were on cheaper, fixed tariffs, they may have to pay more with their new supplier. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson admitted the UK government was concerned about shortages of other goods leading up to 2022, saying that the government wanted to make sure that they had done all preparations necessary to get through until Christmas and beyond, not just in the supply of petrol stations, but all parts of the supply chain. So, Drew, firstly, another 230,000 or so customers moved to new suppliers as a result of these three latest failures. And I remember that 250,000 customers from Green Supplier, which failed last week, have been transferred to Shell Energy. So, firstly, do you think, is it reasonable for customers to be transferred to an oil company?
Well, I think under the current system, there's really no option. If a company goes bust, the people have got a right to be supplied with energy. It can't just stop. So that's got to happen. What really is the problem here has been the failure for the UK government to look at the entire energy market. It's such a big subject with so many failures that it would take an entire program to go through this subject in any kind of detail alone. But some of the headlines are that there has been, a failure quite clearly for the UK government to make the right moves over replacing some of the energy that we've needed with renewables. Don't forget, in Scotland, although we're producing about 100% of our electricity needs from renewable energy, we've done that with one hand tied behind our backs because we've had to use environmental powers to allow that to happen, as opposed to the powers that sit at Westminster over energy that are fully reserved. And what that's meant is that instead of investing in more wind and solar technology over the past few years, the Tories have actually banned that from what they call the contract for difference auctions. In other words, effectively stifling that business and putting us behind where we could have been in terms of renewable energy. The same could be said of pumped storage. As I said, it's a great big subject. But when you come to the current crisis, there's a couple of even more bizarre short-term measures that the UK government have taken, which have been ultimately very harmful to the current situation. They closed, despite this being raised, they closed the last remaining gas storage unit in Rough. Closed that down, meaning that there's no ability to store gas in the UK just now. It is all dependent now on the pipelines that come in, and of course, what we've seen with the movement of fuel around is that people that are going to be on off-grid supplies, and there's a fair few of those in the Highlands and Islands, at risk of getting shortage of deliveries on Cala gas and on fuel oil, as well as what we're seeing with the petrol at the moment. Now, I hope that doesn't become the case, but it's a clear risk, and it has been a clear risk, just in the same way that the HGV driver shortage has been a clear risk for some time. All of that, of course, is being compounded by Brexit. But they have had many, many opportunities to do lots more with it. Whilst I'm mentioning Brexit, I could also point out that the UK, through their hard Brexit deal, came out of the EU's energy market. So it means it can't get the benefit of being sheltered by the prices that are in that organisation either at the moment. So this is a very complex mix that's led to the situation we've got just now. But at the sharp end, people in their homes over this winter are going to be paying a lot more for their energy to heat their homes. And this is at the absolute worst time, when we're coming out at the end of furlough tomorrow, the end of the universal credit £20 uplift, as I referred to earlier. So there's many people, particularly in rural areas, that are going to see higher prices in the shops, which we're seeing already because of rising inflation, met with these higher energy costs, that are going to be suffering the mismanagement that we've seen taking place by the Tory government, and to be fair, and to their to previous Westminster governments, over energy. This should have been tackled a long time ago, and we are where we are now. I'm pleased to see that the Scottish government are taking forward their manifesto commitment to set up a public energy company. I think that'll be an important public energy agency, I should say. I think that'll be an important step forward in terms of getting the right kind of decisions made for us in Scotland in the future with the powers that we do have. But all this is just part of the package of the toxic Tory cost of living shambles that people are being presented with at the moment.
Thanks, Drew. That was a very, very complete answer. I'm pretty sure we're going to be back looking at this issue regularly. And it certainly strikes me that we've said before that whilst the average family household bill for energy in Scotland is £1,700 a year, for families who are off the grid, as you say, it's something like £2,700 a year. So it's a really important issue for these families, and I'm sure we'll come back to you and talk to you about it again. But we'll move on to our next story now, and that's in his conference speech, Keir Starmer has urged former Labour voters to return to the party, promising he will never go into an election with a manifesto that is not a serious plan for government. In his first in-person address to a Labour conference since becoming leader, Starmer sought to present himself as a serious, focused contrast to the trivial approach of Boris Johnson, recounting his background, his two rocks of family and work, and his career as a lawyer and director of public prosecutions in England. Starmer also launched a notably personal attack on the Prime Minister, saying, "I don't think Boris Johnson is a bad man. I think he is a trivial man. I think he is a showman with nothing left to show." There were also several mentions of what Starmer called Johnson's botched Brexit, arguing that more needed to be done to make the deal work after the UK's departure from the EU. Activists from the left of the party heckled and interrupted the address several times. Starmer, meanwhile, delivered a repudiation of the party's direction under Jeremy Corbyn, and he defended his changes to Labour internal rules pushed through at this conference. In his mention of Scotland, he said that the UK is more progressive together, and claimed, "We are greater as Britain than we would be apart." He then added, "As Gordon Brown said recently, when a Welsh or Scottish woman gives blood, she doesn't demand an assurance that it must not go to an English patient." He said he was delighted that Gordon will lead his commission to settle the future of the Union, but failed to address that question of how he would force through federalisation in the UK if and when it was opposed by England. Starmer said that Anna Sarwar had made Scottish Labour the party of the Union, and that they would bring our nations together. The SNP Westminster Deputy Leader Kirsten Oswald MP said that all this speech does is prove how profoundly out of touch Keir Starmer is with what's actually happening in Scotland. Ms Oswald said, "The SNP won by a landslide in May's election, with the biggest share of the vote in the history of devolution, while under Anna Sarwar, Labour fell to their worst ever election result in over 100 years. She added, "Keir Starmer can't complain about Brexit, can complain about Brexit all he wants, but the fact is that he ordered his Labour colleagues to vote for the Tory Brexit deal, which is now having disastrous consequences across the economy and society." Now, Drew, I'll preface this section by remembering that the Labour Party in Scotland got to its current headcount in the Scottish Parliament of 22 MSPs by starting with 56 MSPs in 1999, and in the same period went from 56 MPs to a solitary 1. However, Starmer's reference to a Scottish woman giving blood today seemed more than a little obscure to me. So given that his advisors on Scottish politics are now Ian Murray MP and Anna Sarwar MSP, do you think Sir Keir has any idea about Scottish politics at all? Do you think he has any idea about the lives of the people of Scotland?
Well, I think very clearly Keir Starmer has proved himself time and time again to be completely out of touch with Scotland. I don't think he's really able to put his finger on the pulse of any part of Scottish political discourse, really. It's quite bizarre. I mean, the line about somebody giving blood, I think most of us are just wondering what he's on about with that. And I think that's part of the problem. I think most of Scotland are probably asking the same question of him and the Labour Party at the moment. This constant attempt to deny what's happening and the fact that people are politically aware in Scotland is quite bizarre. And, so is their attempt to deny democracy in Scotland. it's not sustainable. And it's not as if this isn't, part of the proof that it's not sustainable, that we've seen such a decline. You pointed out the fact of where they started and where they are now, and it really is very, very hard. But I think they're trying. It's very, very hard for them to do any worse. But it seems like they're setting out the stall to somehow achieve that result. And against the fact that you have a very toxic Tory government at Westminster.
Thanks, Drew. I think we may have a little problem with the connection to Drew in Inverness, so we'll work with that, and I'll move on to our next story. The man who murdered Sarah Everard using police equipment, including his warrant card and training about COVID rules to force her into a car before he raped and murdered her, a court has heard. Opening a 2-day sentencing hearing, Tom Little QC said Sarah Everard, a 33-year-old marketing executive, was seized from a South London street in March 2021 and driven to Kent, where she was killed. The court heard Wayne Couzens, who was a serving Metropolitan Police officer, used his position and authority to kidnap, rape and murder Sarah Everard, then burn her body in an attempt to hide his crimes. Sarah Everard disappeared on the 3rd of March as she walked home after visiting a friend. She was reported missing by her partner the next day when she failed to meet him as arranged. Her body was recovered 7 days later from woodland near Ashford in Kent. Our thoughts are, of course, with the family and friends of Miss Everard. Today's hearing must have been unimaginably difficult for them. So, firstly, let's see if we have Drew back with us just now. Okay. So Drew's connection from Inverness is still encountering some difficulty. So we'll move on to the next story. And as we get him reconnected, we'll come back to this story and discuss it with him if we can. Oh, I think I can hear that Drew's now back with us. Drew, can you hear me?
A rare technical difficulty, I think. But yes, I'm back.
Never happens. Never happens. Well, that's good to hear you. I was just explaining the next story, which relates to the sentencing hearing of the police constable Wayne Couzens in connection with the abduction, rape, murder and destruction of the body of the late Sarah Everard. And I was just saying that our thoughts are with the family and friends of Miss Everard. Today's hearing must have been unimaginably difficult for them. And I was also going to say that the 2-day sentencing hearing is only halfway through, so I don't think we'll discuss this terrible case here. But I would like to talk to you about policing more generally in light of the apparent manner of Miss Everard's abduction by a serving police officer. And also we have to recognise and respect that the vast majority of police officers do a very difficult job that most of the rest of us would struggle with. And they are part of and yet also serve our communities very well in the main. However, first of all, I'm thinking that first of all, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, I wonder, should she be taking some responsibility for what has happened on her watch? After all, the officer concerned had been reported for exposing himself in a restaurant a few days earlier and was arrested, but apparently little or nothing else was done. And in particular, apparently he wasn't suspended from duty. So and also I'm minded that when the Metropolitan Police Commissioner's contract was extended for another 2 years earlier this month, there was criticism that she was presiding over what was called a culture of incompetence and cover-up. So do you think that the Metropolitan Police Commissioner should consider her position?
Well, it's one of these things where you look at a situation and it's hard to believe that an officer who was found, to have had those breaches was still able to, be a serving police officer beforehand. So there are certainly questions to answer on that. And, Cressida Dick is at the top of the chain, the buck stops there. So I think it would be important for her to, make clear what she intends to do over that. Policing in England is obviously a matter for the UK government, and it will be their decision about how they take this forward. But I don't think anybody would be particularly happy with that situation, regardless of where it happened. And Crescent clearly has a role in answering for the current state of the policing in the metropolitan area.
Thanks, Drew. Bringing it back to Scotland for a moment and thinking of your own constituency, I'm minded that it's taken Police Scotland almost 45 years to arrest the prime suspect in connection with the murder of Rinnie McRae and her wee boy Andrew near Dalmagarry in 1976. So do you think that attitudes towards women that were perhaps more prevalent in the 1970s maybe still exist in some corners of the police service?
Well, I think it's very heartening that action's now being taken and that even at such a historical crime has been taken seriously and pursued to this level. I think over the number of decades, there clearly have been issues within the police service, but I think we should take heart about the fact that they're not only pursuing this, but determined to see even some of these older cases prosecuted. I was in Merkinch in Inverness today speaking with police officers down there in the community beat, and they are doing a difficult job, but doing it very well. We've seen now that crime in Scotland's at a 42-year low, and under very, very difficult circumstances. I think the Police Scotland are doing a commendable job. I have great relations with the police here in this constituency, and it's a very difficult one to police because not only have you got the city, but you've got your outlying rural areas as well to cover. And not everything is perfect with that, but I think they are doing as much as they can. When it comes to women and treating crimes against women, it is important that we always stay vigilant, that we always make sure that that there is a real determination to pursue these criminal complaints when they're made, that these are treated sensibly and correctly and thoroughly in terms of the investigation and the follow through into prosecution where that's possible. And I do believe that is getting better, but are we there yet? No, there's still an awful long way to go. And I think it will be the job of not only the police, but politicians, myself and others, to make sure that we keep making moves to improve that situation and to help all people, but especially women, feel safer in their communities.
Thanks, Drew. And I should say that the sentencing hearing for PC Wayne Couzens at the Old Bailey in London is due to conclude tomorrow. Our next story, however, is that the SNP has challenged Boris Johnson to set the record straight after his announcement during a recent trip that the US had lifted a ban on UK lamb exports was described by his own government officials as being misleading, and that the ban has not yet been lifted. Leaked emails from the Department for Food, Environment and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, state that his claims are misleading, make clear that the ban has not yet been lifted, and that there are many steps to be taken before exports can go ahead. It sets out that there is no deadline for lifting the ban, and shows that the products he specified, namely kebabs and koftas, are extremely unlikely to be initially eligible for export due to specific requirements for such products. Excuse me. In a letter to the Prime Minister, the SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford MP warned that the news will be bitterly disappointing for sheep farmers and crofters across Scotland, and that Johnson must now set the record straight. Now, firstly, Drew, the National Sheep Association said at the time that Johnson misspoke that this would create an opportunity for our industry to maximise trade opportunities, and they have always seen the US as being a potentially important market. However, that's after the domestic market, which takes 60 to 65% of UK production, and the EU, which is still our largest export market and is on our doorstep. So if the two key markets for lamb are the UK and the EU, is this focus on the supposedly the US at some point in the future lifting their restrictions, is this only ever just a sideshow? And can we now see that it may not amount to anything at all?
Well, obviously, America is an important market. It is somewhere that, for example, when we're exporting Scotch whisky, we do a lot of exports to America, and that was why there was such concern over the tariff situation recently. But, and this is the important thing, the US has banned lamb and beef imports for some considerable period of time. So there is very little market there to exploit at the moment. And the fact of the matter is that for Scottish lamb farmers just now, the biggest threat that they've seen recently is the Australia deal that was basically that's been set the precedent for them to be hamstrung over imports into the market and for prices to be undermined by cheaper beef, which is, in some cases being genetically uh, uh, treated with pesticides and other steroids, etc. as well. So all of these things have got the opportunity now to come into the UK market through the Australia deal and this precedent. In terms of this situation with Boris Johnson, he went to America and didn't get any sniff of the trade deal that he was so desperately hoping for. He wanted some kind of olive branch from the US. He didn't get it. He was told that that was very much not going to happen. And so he did what he always did, and he's made stuff up. He's been, as his own government departments have pointed out, he's been misleading about this, and that's unfortunately typical of the Prime Minister and the way he behaves. He will just tend to say things and worry about whether or not he's caught out with them later on in the day. I would like to see the market in the US open up. It would be good to add that on. But again, all of these things are just make a tiny difference to the massive market we've lost on our doorstep with the absolutely awful Brexit deal that's been pushed through. We're losing a massive amount at the moment. It's really hammered Scottish businesses. The current figures at the moment show that Scotland is set to lose about £9 billion in GDP between now and 2030 because of the actions of the UK government over Brexit. Any US deal, Australia deal, tiny as they are, and New Zealand, for example, all of these things, all of the other deals that they're looking at, can only make up a tiny fraction of the amount that's been lost. So it really just sets the scene that it's absolutely vital for Scotland to be able to be in the position of being an independent country so that we can rejoin the European Union and get access again to these markets, which were growing very substantially in Scotland before January this year and have been absolutely hammered since.
Absolutely. Thanks, Drew. And actually, we'll move from farming to fishing now, because Jersey's government has voiced concerns over French fishing boats blockading its main port after the Crown dependency rejected a third of French boats seeking permission to fish in its waters. The Channel Islands Minister for External Affairs, Ian Gorst, said its government had issued 64 full licences and 31 temporary licences to French boats, on top of the 47 vessels already licensed. A further 75 French boats for whom applications had been received were rejected as not meeting the criteria. These 75 vessels are being given 30 days' notice of the end of the transitional arrangements, after which they will no longer be able to access Jersey waters. Gorst said he was open to any of those boats providing fresh evidence in support of a permit, and he conceded there was a danger of reprisals from fishing communities affected, in particular in Brittany. This morning, the French Minister for Maritime Affairs, Annick Girardin, accused the UK government of taking her country's fishers as a political hostage after a separate decision by the UK government to refuse to grant most of their vessels access to its coastal waters. The UK announced it had approved only 12 out of 47 applications for new licences for small boats to fish in the 6 to 12 mile coastal zone. The French government said 87 smaller fishing vessels had applied for permits, not 47 as the UK had said. Paris has privately called on the European Commission to use the tools within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement agreed with the UK last Christmas Eve to force the UK to be more cooperative. A spokesperson for the EU said it would seek full transparency from the UK authorities over their decision. So, Drew, the president of the Regional Council of Brittany tweeted earlier, "I ask the European Union to take all possible retaliatory measures to allow such a decision to be reviewed. Together, fishermen, authorities and the European Union, we must unite to bring the United Kingdom back to reason." So I'm wondering, is there a lesson in this approach, perhaps? I'm thinking maybe cooperation between independent countries and organisations. Is that maybe the way to get things done and to protect our fishing communities?
Well, again, the UK government just seemed to want to put forward confrontation as opposed to being able to sit down and work things out with other nations just now. The fact is that the heat could have been taken out of this issue. It is something that people could have got round the table and discussed and come to a reasonable solution with. But the same could be said of just about every decision that's been taken over fishing over the past number of years. What we've seen, of course, is in Scotland in particular, as a result of UK government actions, is Scotland's fishing community has been absolutely hammered. I mentioned the export figures earlier. A lot of that is fish and seafood that have been hit. That's been a major contributor to that overall figure. But it's just been an issue of ideological self-harm in terms of what's been sold to the fishing industry is going to be something that was going to be great for them and change the way they were going to do it to what they've actually seen as the reality. Again, the sales pitch was made, but it's failed to deliver any of the benefits. Indeed, it's gone the other way. This situation in the Channel Islands with the French government, the UK government just now, it is something that should have a solution that could be got to mutually between the parties. But it just seems that confrontation is the order of the day. I think there's an arrogance around the way this is being dealt with, which is again sadly, and I hate to repeat myself, but it's sadly typical of the way the UK government are engaging internationally just now, particularly when it comes to European nations. It would be much better, as you said, if all of these countries were able to sit down and work out how to collaborate and cooperate to make sure that everybody benefits out of this situation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Drew. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that fears are growing for a photojournalist who has been detained by the Taliban for more than 3 weeks after being arrested while covering the women's protests in Herat. Mortiza Samadi, 21, a freelance photographer, was one of several journalists who were arrested at street protests at the beginning of September. All were quickly released except Mortiza, whose whereabouts are not known. Some of those detained in Kabul have alleged that they were badly beaten and tortured. Fears for Mortiza have grown after the bodies of executed convicts were put on public display in Herat's main squares, a draconian practice that has been brought back by the Taliban. A veteran leader of the Taliban, Mullah Noruddin Turabi, said in an interview with Associated Press that the new government will be bringing back executions as well as amputations as punishment for petty crimes. After rumours circulated online that Mortiza had been sentenced to death, the Taliban released a statement denying he was about to be executed and said that they would release him after he had been cleared by national security. Mortiza's family has only been allowed a 1-minute phone call with him since his arrest on the 7th of September and has not received any information about what he may be charged with. The Taliban's treatment of journalists and their attacks on free speech since gaining control of Afghanistan has drawn criticism from across the world. On the 19th of September, the government announced 11 rules that impose severe restrictions on free speech in the country, laying the groundwork for the detention of journalists. In a statement condemning the move, the International Federation of Journalists said that the regulations forbid journalists and media organisations from publishing or broadcasting stories contrary to Islam, insulting national figures, or violating privacy, but the rules do not provide operational definitions of the terms they contain and provide ample room for individual interpretation by the country's Taliban regime. Now, Drew, Afghanistan is, whilst our thoughts are with Morteza and his family, Afghanistan is not alone in arresting and assaulting journalists. And we know that in other countries, from Russia to Malta to Belarus to the Netherlands, there's been an increase in violence towards journalists and press photographers. Do you think, is this reflecting a change in our wider society in the attitude that we have towards journalists and the work that they do?
I think it's a really worrying trend that we see in these incidents you're talking about just now. You know, journalism isn't important; it's a vital part of you know, holding governments to account and you know, making sure that they act responsibility. If there's no reporting and no ability to report on these things, then you know, that's when bigger problems can happen that can lead to real trouble in terms of, you know, what we've seen in history. The first thing that you know, some of the more extreme regimes will do is try and silence their critics, and so therefore I think it is important that we think not only of him but his family at this time, but there is obviously in Afghanistan itself there is an issue where, you know, we have had the opportunity as the UK to have left things in a much better position there. And there are still a lot of people there that you know, need to be given safe passage and given the ability to escape the regime there if they need to. Many need to, and the resettlement scheme by the UK government that has been announced is welcome in itself, but 20,000 in the long term is not enough. 5,000 in the short term is clearly not enough. In Scotland, we're committed to welcoming and helping and assisting all of those who need to flee Afghanistan at this time. And the same should be for any genuine refugee from anywhere. You're talking about these other countries as well. There should be a safe haven for people here, and that's the attitude that we have in Scotland. In the UK, I think they have to seriously review what they're doing at the moment. As I say, the resettlement scheme for Afghanistan is welcome, but doesn't go far enough and doesn't take into account the responsibilities the UK has for people after so many years with military presence in that country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Drew. Our next story is that YouTube has deleted Russian state-backed broadcaster RT's German language channels, saying that RT had breached YouTube's COVID misinformation policies. Initially, RT's German channel was issued a strike notice for uploading content that violated YouTube's COVID misinformation policy, resulting in a suspension of posting rights on the platform for a week. During that suspension, the Russian broadcaster tried to use another channel to circumvent the ban on uploading, and as a result, both channels were terminated for breaking YouTube's terms of service. Videos uploaded to YouTube must comply with their community guidelines, which sets up the type of content allowed to be shown on the platform. During the pandemic, RT had denied the existence of a second infection wave in Germany and had also reported an alleged vaccine massacre in Norway, according to the German channel ARD. So, Drew, does this disregard of the rules and the strike notice and the suspension, does this indicate that RT will only play by its own rules? And is that a concern? After all, RT has an Ofcom licence to broadcast in the UK.
Well, I think there is a real problem with disinformation, and RT have obviously been at the centre of a number of issues with this. Stuart MacDonald MP produced a paper recently on disinformation and underlining how dangerous it is to people and how effective it can be in spreading harmful information around very, very quickly. There is a need for more action. I'm pleased to see there's been action taken in this instance, but there is a need for more action when this kind of content is uploaded, and because it is very, very quickly shared, and it's the kind of disinformation that can cause upset, that can cause real harm to people. In terms of the issues of vaccination, there's clearly a harm there that would be caused by getting people to believe that there is a problem with that, and you're preventing them and others from getting vaccinated against COVID, which has been obviously a very dangerous, lethal disease that's been striking the planet for the past couple of years. And we need to make sure that that when information goes out, particularly on protecting people and on the public health, that's good information and not the kind of stuff that's being peddled on these with this kind of disinformation at the moment. But I would say to anybody who's interested in this subject, have a look at the paper that Stuart MacDonald MP produced. I think it does open a number of interesting questions for people to answer. There is clearly a need for us all, whether it's in Scotland or in the rest of the UK or indeed in the wider world. There's a need for us all to look at the issue around disinformation and to think about how we're going to tackle that in the future. But in the short term, being able to pull the plug on something as blatant as that, I think is going to be a good thing.
Thanks, Drew. And I was also wondering, I'm wondering whether we should look perhaps at the output of other broadcasters, maybe this time based in London and operating in the UK, with regard to their communications and their editorial policy decisions during the pandemic, especially with regard to the different coronavirus regulations and measures that were introduced in the different countries, the different nations within the UK.
I think you're right. We should always be look at with a critical eye at any news organisation that is putting out news at the moment, and to try to make sure that we're disseminating the fact from the fiction there. I think we're pretty lucky in Scotland that we have quite a politically aware populace here. I think people are very good at discerning, what they feel is, a story that's maybe either being over-egged or falsified or whatever, or given the kind of undue weight. But I think that one thing that I was taught in school was to not take everything at face value and to look and do a wee bit of your own research. And I think that we have to do that. All news organisations have to be responsible. They will make mistakes sometimes. Sometimes they make mistakes because it's just a genuine error. Sometimes there are editorial issues. We see news organisations that are set up to have a particular editorial stance. So I think it is very important that people challenge that and look to make sure that they're being best served with the information that they get.
Thanks, Drew. And we'll move on now to our final story this evening, and that is that the future role of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, as it adapts to meet new challenges, is at the heart of a new consultation. The overriding purpose of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service will remain the protection of communities, preventing fires and reducing their impact on society, while maintaining the safety and mental well-being of their staff. However, the consultation will ask the public about the increasing impact of climate change and the need for the service to take account of greater risks from flooding and wildfires. The importance of the service making a full contribution to the Scottish Government's net zero emissions targets will also be highlighted at a time when Glasgow is preparing to host the COP26 Environment Conference in November. Supporting the modernisation of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and investing to allow it to expand its community safety and prevention work is a key commitment of the programme for government. Other key issues in the consultation on an updated fire and rescue framework for Scotland include the use of new technology and modernisation of facilities and equipment, effective use of resources, and keeping rural communities safe. So, Drew, putting the consultation to one side for a moment, we've recently seen some limited funding and reorganisation of the Scottish Ambulance Service in order to change their service delivery in some rural parts of Scotland, around Blairgowrie and in Argyllshire, for example. Do you think that maybe perhaps the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service needs to look at some of the same or similar changes too?
Well, I think it has been something that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have been involved in for quite some time, looking at how they deliver rural service. In my constituency, as I say, I've got Inverness, but I've also got Nairn and Badenoch and Strathspey as well. It's a very, and of course, the area around Loch Ness, a very diverse and rural area. So we've got a lot of Scottish Fire and Rescue Service personnel that have to work in different ways to service those communities. It's a challenging job, as it would be across the rest of Scotland. So so there is a need to constantly look at how services that are delivered, particularly in rural areas. I think the fact that we're now looking at the use of new technology in homes with new linked fire detection systems becoming part of the law now, means that there is an opportunity to look at technology in a way that will protect us. And I think this 12-week consultation is an opportunity for people to feed in to how they would like to see the service designed for the future. As I say, it's something that I think is an ongoing need, and I think it's good that the public are being asked about how that should be delivered, particularly in the context. And I think it's very pleasing to see that the context has been made squarely within our needs to address climate change and how the service can operate within a new model to take account of the different situations there. But this is something that I think would be welcome. I think that people around this constituency and in other parts of Scotland will be looking to give their views. Sometimes there'll be strong views about what's needed in rural communities, and that's absolutely correct, because rural communities can be overlooked. But also there'll be other views where some of the services that are being provided in rural areas and in our towns and cities are actually there will be welcome improvements that can be made to an already very good service. I've got to say, before I finish this answer, that I mentioned earlier I was speaking to police officers on the beat. I also speak to regularly with fire service personnel, and I've got to say that to a man and woman, they do a great job, and they deserve our thanks for the commitment and effort they make to keep not only us but other people in the communities safe, and the job they do in terms of looking at fire prevention, which is a critical part of the job they do, because if they don't have to go and rush out to fires, that's even better than when they do have to respond to them.
Absolutely, Drew, and I think we would echo absolutely your point that we so hugely support the firemen and women in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, the ones who will run towards a fire when most of us would be standing back and keeping well out of the way.
Indeed.
But that was our final news item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach. If you would like to support us, and we would like you to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to us. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. I'd like to say thanks to you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland, and a very big thank you indeed to Drew Hendry MP for joining us this evening from Inverness.
Thank you.
So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.